Hello friends, my name is Marinez, and today I've invited a bunch of friends to come and share with us their favorite reads of 2020.
Hi everyone, this is Rachael with The Shades of Orange, and my favorite book that I read in 2020 was The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This is a dark, fantastical horror book that involves a man who has to become the hero of the story because this basically follows the beats of a fairy tale. And so it's a story about parenthood, but specifically about fatherhood, which I don't feel is represented enough in stories. And so you get to see the father taking on the hero role and going to save his family. I absolutely love this one. It has some great fantastical and witchy elements. In my opinion, it's very scary, particularly if you're a parent yourself. And the plot is just gripping. I was fully immersed in it. And of course, Victor LaValle brings his own voices experience into the story. And it's very topical for this past year because it really speaks to the experience of being a Black man in the United States today. So highly recommend this one. I just love it so much. Thank you so much for including me in this collab.
Hi, I'm Nicole Sweeney, and you can find me at SweeneySays here on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all the places. I had a fantastic reading year in 2020. However, I think my actual most favorite book that I read was Light from Other Stars by Erica Swyler, which I read in January. But I just love this weird and magical little book and all of the wonderful things that it has to say about grief and loss and loneliness.
Hi, I'm Noria, Chronicles of Noria on YouTube. You can also find me as Chronicles of Noria on Instagram, but Noria the Reader on Twitter. My favorite book of 2020 has to be The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I love this book because the world N.K. Jemisin created in this book is just absolute perfection. The characters felt realistic, but at the same time they also felt larger than life. There was just that intricacy in the story she was telling. The plot was fast-paced. The world building was spectacular. The way in which she immersed us completely in New York City, you would feel like you were living in New York. I absolutely enjoyed it. I would also recommend, because I listened to this on audio, the audiobook for this book is an experience. It's an otherworldly experience. I would highly recommend. This book is a mixture of hip-hop and art and science and math, and it's just this beautiful amalgamation of subjects that just blew my mind away, and I definitely would always recommend it.
Hello, my name is Cait and I'm from the channel ChapterCate. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram at ChapterCate. My favorite book of 2020 was The Deep by River Solomon. I absolutely love this book, and part of that is because it's based on a song by my favorite music group. Clipping is an experimental hip-hop group consisting of Daveed Diggs, Jonathan Snipes, and William Hudson. I love this book tackled really difficult topics such as generational trauma and PTSD. As someone with PTSD, I appreciate any representation of it in media that's done well. And River Solomon absolutely does it well. I'm typically drawn to plot-driven books, but this book is very character-driven in my opinion, and I still remained engaged throughout the entire thing. I also like that this book addresses the idea of responsibilities placed on you by your community and your people, and finding something that works best for you and them at the same time. For that and many other reasons, this was my favorite read of 2020.
Hi everybody, my name is Sajid and I'm from the channel Books on My Social Life. You could also find me on Twitter and Instagram at musaho_books. My favorite book of the year should come as no surprise to anybody because it's Caribbean fiction, and that is A Silent Life by Rayanne Shah. This is a literary novel set in Guyana about a woman and her deep fascination with her grandmother. It also has some really interesting, fabulous elements to it, and it is such a stunning novel. My favorite thing about it is that it explores intergenerational trauma, womanhood, and mental health, all within the context of an Indo-Guyanese Muslim experience. And as an Indo-Caribbean Muslim myself, I really appreciated that it's a perspective that we don't get to see too often, even in Caribbean literature. So I think that this book is immensely valuable for the perspective that it offers alone. On top of that, the writing in here is brilliant. Caribbean authors are in a class of their own, and Shah is no exception to that. Her prose breathes so much life into the moods and the tones of the story, to the surroundings, to the landscape of Guyana, to the characters and the plot. It's just such a wonderfully written story. What's really heartbreaking for me is how obscure and underrated this book is. So if you have not yet heard of it, if you haven't read it, please do yourself the justice of reading A Silent Life by Ryan Shaw, because you will not regret it. It's a great story, especially if you love literary fiction, especially if you love multi-generational stories or stories that are set over a long period of time. This is a beautifully crafted piece of work and everybody should read it.
Hi, I'm Deboki. I'm from the channel okidokiboki. My favorite book that I read in 2020 was Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This book is the grad school angst of chemistry by Weike Wang meets the day party shenanigans of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and that is not a combination that I ever would have thought I wanted or needed, but I am so glad that Brandon Taylor decided to write it. And like those books, Real Life is driven by the perspective of its main character, Wallace, who I could sit and read dissecting nematodes and his friends' miseries all day long. He may not always make the decisions you want him to make, and I'm not entirely sure that even he knows like why he's making these choices, but reading this book felt like rooting for a friend to figure out all of that in their own way and on their own time.
My favorite book of 2020 was Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. This is always very difficult for me to narrow down, and it was especially difficult in 2020 when I read so many phenomenal books. But ultimately, I picked Black Girl Unlimited not only because it was such an impactful and moving story, but because it is a story that felt really fresh and different from anything else that I had read in the year. This is a partly autobiographical story that introduces elements of fabulism, and it is a magic that feels very literal in the story, but also acts metaphorically. And a lot of times the magic is metaphorical, but there is also these times where it is magic. It is just part of the world that Brown has created. Brown also plays around with timelines and structure in this book, and sometimes one line feeds into a break into a different scene and continuing that line in the new scene. It felt very much like a montage in a TV show or a movie would feel like, but for the written word. On top of all of that, I felt that this was such an important story. It has a ton of content warnings as it explores what it means to survive and what it means to grow past sort of where you are planted, and it just spoke to me very personally about the things that we sacrifice in order to just make it, or the dreams that we bury in order to survive. I cried through a lot of this story, and it is something that I have not stopped thinking about it since I read it, so I highly, highly recommend.
Hello everybody, it's Cara from wildebookgarden, and my favorite book of 2020 was Raybearer by Jordan Afueco. The book is divided into multiple parts, and every single part is better than the previous one. Jordan Afueco just expands the story and the world so beautifully in every single part. Tara Sai as the main character is absolutely wonderful to follow. She is so good and brave and smart and compassionate, and the entire time she's trying to figure out how much of herself is truly her and how much is based on her mother or the way that she was raised for this terrible act she has to commit. To see her struggle with that was very, very poignant and just beautifully done character development. The world and the setting of this book is also fantastic, and it really contributes to the exploration of themes in this novel. The way that the plot and the setting work together to form commentary on things like colonization and empire and all of these other issues is just so impressive and so detailed, and I also love just the cast of characters in general. All of the other characters are wonderfully developed as well. We have some great friendships, some really great found family in this book. There's also a romantic subplot that does not take over the story but is still very well developed, and it doesn't necessarily go the way that I think you might expect from the synopsis. This is just a fantasy novel that does every single thing well. The characters, the plot, the setting, the themes, and I can't wait to read book 2.
Hi Mari, it's Kathy, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kathy Trithardt. You can find me here on BookTube as well as Instagram and Twitter, all under that really strange surname, Kathy Trithardt. If you know me, you know that choosing favorites is not my favorite thing in the world to do. I'm not very good at it. I kind of think that my brain process is similar to those trying to figure out like their favorite child or pet or houseplant for those people that have those things. With that in mind, I went through my spreadsheet, I looked at everything that I rated 5 stars this year, and then I looked at which book I read the most times this year that I rated 5 stars, and that's how I got to this answer. That answer is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I had the pleasure of meeting Aiden Thomas last year at Geek Girl Con, back when you could do things like go to conventions, and immediately was super into the idea of this book. I then got this arc in about February and was able to read it in March. The original date was supposed to be June for release, and then it got pushed back to October, so in October, or just before then, I read it again and tabbed it up. I had never tabbed a book before, so that was very exciting because I wanted to do a very proper review of it. And then when the audiobook came out, I also listened to the audiobook because I wanted to hear what the audiobook was like. So I read this book 3 times this year, gave it 5 out of 5 stars every time. Absolutely loved it, love the characters. I cannot wait until Aiden publishes more things.
Hello everyone, my name is Paola from the channel Paola Guerrero. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at Guerrero, and I also have a blog which is called By My Shelf. That's shelf with 2 F's at the end, .wordpress.com. My favorite book that I read this year was Tiny Pretty Things by Daniel Clayton and Sona Charaipotra. This was so life-changing. It reminded me of when I was like those girls, not in terms of me being like a competitive ballet dancer, just in terms of all the fight and all the spark that I had in me at 16, 17 years old, and how there was no one standing in between me and my dream. And so this book taught me so effing much about myself and what it is like to be passionate about something and wanting nothing else but that. Please don't judge it by how bad the show was. I know a lot of people have loved the show, but those of you who hated it, don't judge the books by the TV show. The books are significantly better than the TV show, whatever the TV show was trying to do.
Hi, I'm Desirae. You can find me at Libri Labra on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. My favorite book of the year was Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. This book took me completely by surprise. I actually didn't even know what I was getting into when I picked it up. I didn't bother reading the summary, but it had been gifted to me, and it is a friends to lovers romance. It is a second chance romance, but it made me cry, it made me laugh, it made me swoon, it made me feel all the feels that I haven't felt in quite some time. So it was just really surprising. It was a roller coaster. You know, there may be a part that was a little bit hard to digest and believe, but overall, just the range of emotions that I experienced was awesome, and I absolutely loved it.
Hi, my name is Rachael, and my channel name is The Boston Book Biddy, and my favorite book this year was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Maxey, or Maxey. To be honest, I don't know. What I do know is that he is a very well-known illustrator, and this book came out this year, and it was something I absolutely needed. So the overall style of this is it's a graphic novel, and it's kind of like a panel, a page, with the boy going off on his own and then meeting these animals. He gets encouragement from every animal that he meets. Like the mole at one point goes, "The older moles that I've met regret listening to their fears more than to their dreams." And I like that. It's like, all right, you can be brave. But it just like doesn't necessarily say like you have to be a certain kind of bravery, because later on the boy asks the horse, like, what's the bravest thing you ever said or ever did? And the horse goes, asking for help. Like, I love how the overall message of this was being incredibly kind to yourself, doing your best, and doing your best can be different things. Like at one point at the end or at the beginning, I forget which, the author describes each one of the animals, and the fox is relatively quiet, and that's because he was hurt in the past and he was having a hard time opening up to all these different characters, and he slowly eventually does. And I love that each character is at a different place in their lives. The art style is also very charming. It's kind of like it's been etched out. It's not perfect. It's very scribbly. The font was cursive and it fit the overall theme of it. But that was, I would say that's the only flaw, because even though the font was very like aesthetically pleasing and it matched the overall theme, at times it did get a little bit hard to read. But I have to say that's like really the only flaw. It's beautiful. It's something that I would highly recommend that anybody pick up. It's a fast read, and it really will lift your spirits. And I think it's something that we all need, especially the year we all just had.
Hola y'all, I'm Michelle Flores, aka Shelly Flowers. I host a booktube channel called Shelly Flowers Reads and Writes, where I talk about all things related to reading and writing, sometimes teaching. I am also an author, an educator, a mom. But anyway, I wanted to take some time in this video to share my favorite book of 2020. And that book is this incredible work of art. I don't even know if we can really call it a book so much as like a collection of art pieces. Intergalactic Travels by Alan Pelaez Lopez. For those of you who don't know, Alan Pelaez Lopez is an incredible force to be reckoned with and a thought leader within the Latinx spaces, really. They came up with the hashtag last year, Latinidad is canceled, and their work is a constant exploration of the ways in which Latinidad can be used to further the settler colonial state, which is an extremely heavy topic, but one that needs to be discussed, particularly within the US, where Latinos are oftentimes treated as a minority or as a racial group when that's not actually the case. That's something that I really appreciated about this book, is how deep it went into their identities as an Afro-Indigenous, non-binary, undocumented immigrant into the US, the ways in which the education system failed them, the ways in which machismo failed them as someone who is more femme-presenting. It was just such an eye-opening experience for me, and now that I know that this person exists in the world, there's someone I constantly look to challenge my perspective. So if you are someone who is interested in more mixed media print, if you are interested in experimental poetry, if you are interested in border crossing stories, Alan is your person. They've got everything that you're looking for right inside this book.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I recently started reposting on my channel BookChats on YouTube, but you can most likely find me on Twitter at Caitlin Vanasse. And my favorite book of the year is actually one that was recommended to me by Mari, or was recommended by Mari, and that is I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. I read a lot of books this year that were really good, but this one is my favorite because it was the most personally touching, useful, and hopeful of the books that I read. This book is not glossing over things that are wrong in America, and specifically in the American church around race relations. Austin Channing Brown writes about her life and experiences as a Black woman who works in nonprofits that are religiously affiliated and who works with white church members. And it does not gloss over any of that, but it still has a lot of hope for the future. And it's written in a way that felt extremely accessible to me, but also felt like a book that I could hand to many people I've been struggling to sort of talk to about these issues, who are still in the mindset that racism is more personal and less structural, or who don't really understand the ways that structural racism can affect people directly in a way that allows them not to necessarily pull themselves up by their bootstraps over it. I read this book and immediately wanted to buy a copy for so many people I know, and it ended up then being my favorite of the year. I actually already want to reread it, and I have tabbed it, which I don't normally do. So that is the book I would highly recommend to you, especially if you came through 2020 wanting to read more about the experiences of Black women in America, and specifically experiences of Black women in roles adjacent to the church or as part of the church.
My name is Vanessa, and my channel is Split Reads, where I read a lot of nonfiction, graphic novels, and hard-hitting fiction, especially middle grade. My favorite book of 2020 is Saigon by Phuc Tran. This is a really special coming-of-age memoir that touches on abuse, racism, fitting in, and self-discovery. I really loved how Tran mixed 80s culture, punk rock, and classic American literature to tell his story. I recommend everyone that likes memoirs to please read it.
Thank you so much to everybody who answered my call for volunteers. Since the very beginning of my channel, when I joined YouTube in 2015, I have been so passionate about putting together these collaborations. I have a whole playlist dedicated to the collaborations I've done over the years, including all of the best of the year videos dating back to 2015. Soon you'll see our worst of the year as well as our most anticipated of 2021. I encourage you guys to check out the information in the description, where I will link all of these creators and their channels. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that were mentioned, let's chat about that down in the comments, and feel free to also share your favorite read of 2020. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.